Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels. On Brussels, my love, we take a look at some of the big stories of the week, examine what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, we're zooming in on all those seeking asylum in Europe today. With requests on the rise, scenes of people sleeping rough with no access to even a shower have become the norm across the continent. With a heated debate in the European Parliament this week and an EU Commission plan to send people home fast, we're asking if the fate of asylum seekers in Europe is doomed. And TikTok, thanks, but no thanks. EU institutions have joined Canada, the US and a growing list of countries in banning their employees from using the Chinese-owned social media app on their work phones. It's for security reasons, they say, concerned the Chinese government could snoop on European affairs. We're asking if this is the way to go or if EU cybersecurity and privacy rules should not be better fit for purpose. To talk about these stories and much, much more, I'm joined here in our studio by Tommy Hutanen, Executive Director of the Wilfred Martens Centre for European Studies. We're also joined by Iverna McGowan, Secretary General of the Centre for Democracy and Technology. You're very welcome. And we're joined by Alberto Horst Neidhardt, Senior Policy Analyst at the European Policy Centre. Thank you so much to you all for being with us. And before we get your insights, let's just take a look at the situation today for asylum seekers across the continent. Christopher Pitchers reports.
Migration flows and how to handle them has been a divisive topic for years now. As wave after wave of migrants has hit Europe, consecutive governments are for the most part focused on how to keep people out of Fortress EU. From building border walls to stopping migrant boats. What most governments haven't concentrated on, though, is the treatment of asylum seekers. As one NGO recently told Euronews, it simply isn't a vote winner to be seen to provide too much help for them. An exception to the rule has been the treatment of Ukrainian refugees who were welcomed with open arms last year. But migration waves, however, are only expected to increase in size in the coming years. And hand in hand with this, support for anti-migrant groups. This doesn't bode well for asylum seekers. It begs the question, is their fate in Europe doomed?
Christopher Pitchers reporting there. So, simple question, really. Is their fate doomed here in Europe? Tommy?
So, first of all, if you now look at what is discussed in the media and also the television, you have a very quickly impression that it's all 2015 situation. But in fact, most of the immigrants don't come by the boats, like in the video. They come actually legally. Ukrainians were mentioned, also we have from Latin America. We are discussing about some coming...
Just let's be honest now, Ukrainians was a special case. Ukrainians got special treatment.
Yes, of
If you're
course.
Ukrainian, you seem to be welcome in Europe. If you're not Ukrainian, you're not.
But that's a challenge and that's an issue that we have to handle. That, of course, who will be against not helping Ukrainians? And that's our first-hand, I would say, duty and responsibility.
Okay,
So,
well, let's just broaden there the net. We're not talking here about Ukrainians. We're talking about wider asylum seekers coming from a number of other countries, and we will tell our viewers in a minute where those countries are from. Just what's your reaction?
Well, I think the images of people sleeping rough in European capitals is becoming more and more common, and I think it really reflects the reception conditions around Europe. My sense is that for a long time the situation has been ignored, and there is some responsibility of European governments about the situation that we have now. Instead of creating additional reception places, for instance, since 2015, we have seen a reduction of the places which are available in reception systems, which means that those who have a right to actually be accommodated have to sleep in tents. The second development which I think we should keep in mind is that there is a growing gap between the number of applications for asylum that we see in Europe and the number of decisions. And so the time before people get an answer increases, which leads to bottlenecks. And
we'll come back to those bottlenecks. Let's just bring in Iverna McGowan there for your take on this lack of hope, perhaps, for asylum seekers.
Thank you, Maeve. Just watching that report there, a number of of things really struck me. First of all, we've had, as the report was saying, this approach of stopping people coming, building higher fences for many years, and it's reaping the same results. And it just strikes me that, unfortunately, due to the politics a little bit in Europe, it was said about winning votes, that we're moving further and further away from an evidence-based approach to asylum and migration policy. We know that if you offer quicker economic integration, you have better results that our economies need to welcome people. We also know that by offering more safe and legal routes, that you're actually going to avoid these, horrendous and repeated loss of life in the Mediterranean. And I do think we've got serious moral questions to ask ourselves as well when you do see a situation of people being treated differently on the basis of their nationality. So I would say that we need to also hold our politicians to account. It's a bit lazy politics. There's very complex socioeconomic challenges at the moment, the cost of living. It's all too easy to blame the most vulnerable in our society, but actually what we should be doing is actually challenging the entire approach.
Well, that point there about asylum seekers offering them a safe haven, it doesn't win you votes. That was according to the NGO there in the story, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, and I also would echo what has just been said. I think the tendency has been to give priority to short-term goals, like trying to prevent all arrivals, which we know is unrealistic. I also, in my view, think that it's unreasonable to give priority to short-term goals, like preventing arrivals, instead of focusing on long-term common interests with other countries in relation to development, in relation to the state of the economy and economic prospects in countries of origin, among others.
Yeah. Tell me briefly, and then
I would nevertheless give some credit for the EU member states. The system is better. The border guard system, also European cooperation, all of that. Then, number one. Number two, the fact is that only 40% of the asylum applicants are accepted. So that means that there are 60% applicants who are getting in our country or countries or in Europe, and so we have to deal with that flow also.
Okay, let's just stop you there, Tommy, because I want to just show our viewers the latest figures and show how the actual number of asylum seekers coming to the European Union spiked last year in 2022. 330,000 irregular border crossings were detected. That's the highest number since 2016. And almost 1 million new asylum requests were registered. That's a 50% rise on 2021. And unfortunately, almost 2,500 people died trying to reach the European Union. And that's, of course, not to mention those that died in the last couple of weeks, as we saw, of course, over in Italy. And I imagine this trend will continue, Tommy, as the weather starts getting better.
Yeah, but actually your numbers kind of show the challenge. So we have 300,000 people who are irregularly entering the European Union, but you have 1 million applications. So what does it mean? That means that many of who come in apply in various countries, or actually are not those who have entered illegally. So many people come with a visa through airport, buy something in tax-free, come in, and then are here for different reasons, and then do the application. So that's one of the challenges also.
Okay, and let's just show our viewers where these majority of people are coming from. You can take a look at the graph. The majority, in fact, are coming from Syria. 131,000, over 131,000 came from Syria last year, then Afghanistan, Turkey, Venezuela, Colombia, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Georgia. I mean, these countries, Iverna McGowan, deemed safe countries in the eyes of the EU, and that's why the EU wants to see these people returned fast.
I mean, it's really striking that Syria is coming up as number one on that list, considering that we still have an unresolved, just 10 years now of that civil war in Syria, of course, plus the devastating earthquake that hasn't been adequately responded to. And just to give a quick note about the extent of what I think is really worrying is we're talking about human dignity. You mentioned the deaths that happened. One boy lost his entire family. That really left me sitting, with real moral question. I think it should all as Europeans. And to give a notion of just how far this has gone, I think, of the politicisation, the European Artificial Intelligence Act is being debated at the moment. It's a law to regulate AI and to bring human rights. And together with 160 civil society partners at Centre for Democracy and Technology Europe, we've had to write a letter to European leaders asking them not to make a carve-out that the most vulnerable would not be protected by this law. And, the entire point as a society and human rights is to uphold human dignity. So I think we really need to have a deep reflection as a society where we are in migration and asylum policy in Europe.
And there was a big debate, in fact, on this week in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where members members of the European Parliament were meeting and they were discussing the recent shipwreck over in Italy. It took place on the 26th of February, saw 70 people lose their lives. You can take a look there at the pictures on your screen. There was outrage, in fact, in the European Parliament as well among the reactions from the government with a boat in distress at sea, and very little reaction coming from the government. Now, Verna, you said these images are still provoking a lot in you, but among your political members, among your think tank, are they really getting upset with those images? What is your reaction?
Of course, it's very dramatic, and of course those people have this, everybody's sympathy in Europe. That's very, very clear. But it's also very clear, I think, that the member states, they're trying their best in difficult conditions, and of course those what we are seeing is there's a big business still around this whole refugee migration situation, and that's still working, and we should tackle against that.
Well, Tommy thinks that member states are trying their best, Albert, but in fact, just last weekend we saw images over in Italy of the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, and her Transport Minister and Infrastructure Minister, Matteo Salvini, singing karaoke. This also came up this week at the European Parliament. We can take a look at they were singing karaoke just as these atrocities were taking place. So these images, I mean, you're from Italy. Have you seen these images?
I've seen the images, and I'd rather not comment on this episode in itself. I'd rather comment on the tragedy. And I think that this is just a painful reminder of the fact that there has been a collective failure to address structural issues when it comes to irregular arrivals. I don't disagree that efforts have been made, but I also cannot but think that for many years we didn't have a search and rescue approach to this issue, and because of that we have seen more and more tragedies, and inevitably this is not going to be the last one. And to add to this, I would like to also emphasize
just on those images, because you don't want to react to those images, but Iverna, do you want to react to those images and the fact that 5,000 people as well were protesting in Italy as well last weekend regarding those images and calling on their government to show a little bit more humanity?
Well, not to comment on the images directly, but obviously it's extremely worrying, the positioning that we've seen by the Italian government. Again, when you see Syria as the first country, as long as we have those awful conditions, people will continue to arrive, and we obviously have a duty to save lives at sea. There's been a worrying trend towards the criminalisation of not-for-profits in offering humanitarian assistance in this. But your opening question, Maeve, also struck me, is that are they doomed? And we talk about EU leaders. Something that I think also deserves attention is the people on the ground in Europe. There's been incredible initiatives like community sponsorship, where in communities people are banding together to welcome asylum seekers, migrants and refugees into their communities. And it's worked really well and had very positive outcomes. So again, we'd really challenge the approach to say, can we just rethink this and think of a different way forward rather than replaying these tragic scenes on repeat?
But that go ahead.
But two points, agreeing. But then the question is that in the long run, as was pointed in the beginning, we will have a situation upcoming decades when tens of, maybe hundreds of million people want to come Europe, and there's a will to have people here also for the labor reasons, but there will be a permanent disbalance. So then the question is, how shall we handle that situation? And Italy, for example, is working very hard now the humanitarian corridors as a compensation for the situation, not compensation, to avoid situations like that. So efforts have been made. But what is my point? My point is that this tension, these images, unfortunately, will going to continue unless we are going to able to create a situation where, for example, those boats are not able to leave to the to the sea and cause those disasters.
Well, going after the smugglers, I mean, that's something we've been hearing for years and years. It's been among debate among heads of state and government as they meet here in Brussels. They'll be meeting as well next week. But I just want to bring in the opinion of a member of the European Parliament as well, because as I said earlier, the members of the European Parliament were discussing this week in Strasbourg as they met. A lot of members from the left side of the chamber were saying that the European Commission are too focused on returns, because the Commission as well presented a proposal today on this week on border management. We can take a listen now to one Dutch MEP from the European People's Party. He wants the Commission to go a little bit further. Here's Jeroen Lenaers.
It's an important step. You know, as EPP Group, we've been asking the Commission for a very long time to put more emphasis on the protection of our external borders. And the fact that they now come up with the plan to increase the protection of our borders through smart cameras, through drones, is very important. What I still don't understand, where I think the plan is lacking a little bit, is the fact that the Commission still refuses to finance permanent infrastructure on the borders, for instance in the shape of fences, and the European Commission says, no, you're on your own. And I don't think that is the kind of solidarity we need in Europe.
So Jeroen Lenaers there speaking earlier this week in Strasbourg, asking the European Commission for more, asking them to fund these fences, these walls. Albert, your reaction?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the statement. I think there has been an overemphasis on protecting borders for many years now. And what has also happened is that despite the consolidation of the borders and more funding being allocated for the infrastructure itself by national governments, we do see that people nevertheless try to come to Europe. So I think it's the wrong approach. The right approach is actually to, on the one hand, offer legal pathways to come to Europe, also create alternatives so that people do not put themselves in danger or resort to smuggling networks.
I think the fundamental problem is the fact that only 20% of those people who have been declined the asylum application are really returning their own countries, or we are able to deport them back. And that's, I think, the Commission's proposals is kind of, or attitude reflects that, and also the member states. That's one of the key problems, because in your line is that, okay, that we take the people in, but we are not able to process it. We are not able to send them back, and that's the problem here.
What's your reaction to that, Iverna? I mean, it's a valid point.
Well, I think, again, I mean, the points are linked up that obviously we are dealing with really a lot of the most vulnerable, the different reasons. We've had serious problems with the correct processing of application processes for many years, but also just going back on what we said earlier, it can be easy to be scared by statistics, but they have to be put in context. I mean, we've seen numbers like 1 million arrivals for so many years now. As a percentage of the total European population, we should definitely be able to manage that.
So, Iverna, when you hear countries like Germany, Austria and Belgium as well this week saying they're overstretched, the reception centres cannot look after asylum seekers coming, what do you say to them?
I think we obviously need to look at sharing the burden across Europe. That's been an issue for many years. Something that struck me very worryingly from the MEP saying as well, to step up this idea of surveillance and drones. Again, we know that such technologies have discriminatory outcomes. There's been a lot of movement against racism and other issues. So the idea
that in your home country in Ireland,
absolutely,
63 and xenophobic protests, according to the police, took place in Ireland this year.
So we have this challenge of racism. We know that these technologies, when deployed against vulnerable groups in particular, can exacerbate that discrimination.
So how does that make these migrants feel? People as well here in Europe, when they see this rhetoric, the fact that people want money spent on building fences to keep them out?
Funny enough, actually many, first of all, those who are directly imposed, of course, not well. But in fact, if you look at the immigrants in Europe, many of them actually are agreeing on the fact that we have to, that society cannot absorb forever. We are seeing that in many EU member states very clearly. You mentioned Germany, you could mention Sweden, etc., etc. I think the societies are trying very hard. I would give an example on Sweden, who culturally, in many ways, try to really integrate and make an effort. And we see now the consequences, and that consequence has impact on policies.
And what about Albert?
I want to go back a little bit. You asked correctly, how do we solve the problems? I think we need, first of all, to make investments to make sure that asylum processes are carried out faster. I agree. You mentioned returns. People who didn't succeed at proving their asylum claims may be returned, but there it's oftentimes easier said than done. In order to carry out returns, you need to give prospects to the people who have been failed by the system, and you also need to convince third countries to take these persons back, and that's also easier said than done. So we need investments. We need investments in asylum systems. We also need to give concrete economic prospects to the people who are in Europe to create opportunities for socio-economic integration. Just focusing exclusively on keeping people outside, it's not going to work. It's morally questionable, and also from my viewpoint, economically suicidal, because Europe needs more persons.
I'm going to have to stop you there. We have run out of time. But unfortunately, I know we will be coming back again and again and again to this topic as EU heads and state and government try to figure it out. But thank you so much for your insights, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a look back at some of the European stories that hit the headlines of late. And one story that we're following closely is how Belgium this week joined a number of EU countries in banning their staff from using TikTok on their work phones. The EU Commission and the EU Parliament have already banned it from their devices too. China has said that this is creating a very bad atmosphere for business. Have you seen this news? Verna, we start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Maeve. Indeed, we're obviously following that very closely, working on democracy, technology and human rights as we are. I think what really struck me about this story is that we need to be quite careful. So obviously, we have quite robust privacy and data protection laws here in Europe and the GDPR, but it raises a question about how well they're being enforced. But also, we need to be a bit careful about the approach of banning applications themselves. Why? Because this really serves as a challenging precedent for particularly authoritarian states where obviously they want to crack down on freedom of expression, political organising and others. So I think we'll have to be quite cautious in our approach here.
OK, what about you? Is it the way to go?
Well, first of all, let me say that I would find it surprising if public officials were paid to watch video content on TikTok. But without trivializing this, I would agree this is perhaps not the right approach. I think there are always ways to bypass bans. I'm also aware of the fact that there could be a situation where these backfires simply because there are concerns about the freedom of expression. What, for me, this development shows is how much power one can gain by developing competitive social applications, and also how important for an entity, whatever entity, to control the medium, because that also gives you the opportunity of controlling the message.
OK, let's hear from Tommy, your perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. We have to be very careful on the steps we take, but especially the point is on control. But I would like to put in the larger picture, because not only TikTok, but all these social media platforms, what we are seeing actually these months and upcoming years, there will be huge discussion about the impact of those tools to the mental health of the young people. And it's
but this ban has nothing to do with the mental health of people. This ban has all to do with security.
Yes, but I think that's an important aspect of it.
That's actually another debate, which I would love to come back to on Brussels, my love, another day.
Okay.
This is specifically targeted on the fact that why they've done this ban. It's for security reasons. It's nothing to do with the fact that they're worried about the health of Europeans that are spending a lot of time, right, Verna?
Yeah, exactly. So just and not to downplay the security concerns. Obviously, China is a state that has an egregious human rights situation, has mass surveillance. So I want to stress that the importance that user data is not transferred to China is an extremely important one. But that is up to a robust enforcement of the GDPR, which we know, has been somewhat lacking. And then quickly, happy to discuss. We also have the Digital Services Act when it comes to those.
And that'll be another debate. Do you have TikTok? Any of you? Do you use TikTok?
No, I don't. But it's because.
Do you know what it looks like?
Yes, I do, because my daughter has it in a separate platform. But it's used professionally, actually, in various countries in a political campaign.
And
TikTok
and
has
a lot of
become,
MEPs
in Italy, actually,
are using it very successfully. And
yes.
But I just want to show our viewers, even though 2 billion people have allegedly downloaded TikTok on their phones. 2 billion, huge figures. But some of you might not know what it looks like. So here's a quick look at what TikTok actually looks like. This is the Euronews TikTok account.
How do you say I love you in different languages?
Je t'aime. Te quiero, te adoro, te amo.
Ti amo. Ich liebe dich.
Aimo-te.
Tagragan dich.
Minä rakastan sinua.
Yassiru Memkes. Wani.
أحبك أعشقك أهواك.
Ja tebe kochаю.
So there you go, Tommy, a glimpse of TikTok.
Yes, indeed. But in general, for the discussion, I think those, we should have a very serious discussion on the TikTok about all these issues. But I don't see. Look what the other countries have done. India, decision on that. In China, the same platform looks totally different. So I think those decisions done by the EU for the officials, I think these are very.
And China obviously
relevant.
Furious, Verna and Alberto, with this ban, saying it creates a very bad atmosphere for business, saying it's unjustified. I mean, the wider geopolitical implications of this ban are interesting too.
Well, absolutely. I think it comes back to the same fundamental question, but I was smiling there because something else that has come to light, that European, well, not just European Commission officials, but EU officials in general, when they communicate with you, they'll always insist on using Signal app, right? Yeah. And that's really interesting because it's a bit of a similar issue. But at the same time, some of the EU laws that we have coming are going to risk undermining end-to-end encryption, which is extremely important for security. So I think there's also this question of coherence in EU policy as well, and knowing how important that security is to investigative journalists, human rights defenders and others. So I think there also has to be a bit of a rethink about the coherence and consistency of some of these policies.
Yeah, I would agree. And also to go back to the video that we just have seen, I think there is an overarching question about communication from Brussels to the younger generation that we should also have in the context of this discussion. It's not only about which media can be used, but it's also how effectively these can be used and are used by politicians in order to reach to the new generations. Just one small point on the ban itself and China's reaction. I think it's interesting because we cannot but also keep in mind that not all social media applications or not all applications can be used in China. So obviously the hypocrisy is there.
Yeah, reciprocity. I think that's an important point, a legit point here.
And Alberto making an interesting point there. I mean, the EU wants to speak to young people. It wants to be where young people are. It wants to be on these platforms. You, for example, as well, at the Wilfred Centre, you want to reach out to people like your daughter, their generation, tell them to go vote next year in the elections. Yeah. So you've got to be on these apps.
Yeah, but let's say, for example, in India, what happened when they banned? It didn't take so long time before alternative platforms are used. So I think this is more discussion about principles than tools, especially. So what I want to say is that if TikTok would be banned, I think for the people or those who are using it, I don't think the impact would be so huge in the long term.
Iverna, last word there?
Against evidence-based approach, TikTok have come out with a public statement saying that a number of employees in China had access. They're now trying to remedy that. There's an ongoing investigation by the DPA. But, if the security threat was such that government staff shouldn't be using it, what should be also communicated, to the public as well? I think we need to keep that evidence-based approach, obviously, and focus on the enforcement of data protection and privacy, because the risk of banning apps themselves, it doesn't work and it has too disproportionate impact on free expression.
Exactly.
And just briefly, if you were a journalist, would you use it?
If I was a journalist, would I use it?
TikTok.
I think if I was a journalist at the moment, I don't use a pen and paper, Maeve, to be very honest with you.
That's what the Pirate Party always tell me. Okay, and what about you, very briefly?
Well, to go back a little bit, I don't use it, and I wouldn't recommend using it. And I would also think that given the security concerns, it's better to avoid using mobile phones in the first place.
Okay, so back to the good old pen and paper. That is, I'm afraid, all we have time for. But thank you so much for that. And thank you for watching. See you soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a little look back at some of the stories that caught our eye this week. Well, one that brought a smile to our face was looking at the European wins at the Academy Awards, better known as the Oscars. But actually, what we want to talk about today here is the messages and politics behind the red carpet. Take a look.
My journey started on a boat. I spent a year in a refugee camp. And somehow, I ended up here on Hollywood's biggest stage. They say stories like this only happen in the movies. I cannot believe it's happening to me. This is the American dream.
There you go. Your reaction to that, a very emotional intervention.
Well, bravo to him, first of all, and I cannot but feel sympathetic to whomever has a message of compassion and hope, and this is what we heard.
And that is, of course, the world stage, no? Everyone's looking.
Absolutely. And I think, to the fundamental question is that about these different events, that we don't live in a vacuum. And these are the reality of our times. And obviously, art and other things can be used as a medium to express some of these things. But I do think when you have privilege and power in this world, you have a responsibility to also reflect on those messages and to speak up, whether it's your own story or those of others.
Yeah, world needs positive human stories, and I think that there was one, so very touching.
Of course, he's one in a million.
Yes.
And we saw there a number of celebrities wearing the hashtag with refugees. So the Oscars, I guess, has always been a stage, Iverna, for political messaging.
Indeed, of course it is, and I think, you know, obviously it's not on us to comment on the Oscars programming, etc. But as we discussed earlier, asylum seekers and refugees are literally the most vulnerable in our society, and I think there is a great responsibility for any of us who have power, privilege, or voice to really speak up, because, you know, it was mentioned earlier that they're often disenfranchised. They don't have a voice, they don't have a seat at the table to vote, and that's what really, I think, increases the need for more protections for them, but also for all of us to step up to the plate and to speak to the importance of protection.
But, you know, because he made the comment, this is the, you know, American story, but there's many such stories also in Europe. Maybe not, we don't have Oscars, but you know, we have a lot of success stories. We have a political bubble in Brussels, so, you know, just to mention, like 3 of our prime ministers have now, you know, directly Indian background, for example. So there is a certain openness, nevertheless, in the European.
I would echo all of that. One important factor that we have to keep in mind is that you don't want to necessarily raise the expectation that all refugees end up winning the Oscar. And I don't want to trivialize it, but there is a risk
especially
of going...
based on our first block, what we discussed a little bit earlier in the programme.
You cannot go from hero to zero just like that. There needs to be a coherent communication. I agree. We need to have a message of compassion, and we need to keep in mind that these are the most vulnerable populations. We also can't run the risk of portraying these in either too much of an oversimplistic, optimistic light.
And coming on that, exactly, because many times the discussion is a bit dishonest, in the sense that if you want to make a point that immigration is somehow dangerous, etc., you have a story where something has happened, immigrants have made a crime, or if you want to underline it very positively, you have a story like that. But in reality, when you have people coming in to Europe or United States, you know, all kind of stories happen. Some of them integrate greatly, some of them are success stories, some stories end up bad, and some there between. And that's the reality, human reality.
Oh, reality dose there. Just briefly, Iverna, we saw Ukrainians were very upset this year at the Oscars because their President Zelensky wasn't allowed to come and speak, and also the documentary about Navalny won an award. Just a brief reaction to that.
Like I said, it wouldn't be to me personally to comment on the programme of the Oscars. So I think and obviously cinema has been used as a great way to raise some of those issues. So I think we shouldn't get into maybe the programming of any individual event. But definitely I would say, whether it's actors or others or celebrities or those with power in their individual capacity, they definitely should take a stand and stand up for the most vulnerable. Absolutely.
A bit like the Eurovision, huh? That always gets very political. We can look forward to that on the 13th of May. But for now, thank you so much for being with us here in our studio. Thank you for watching. And for all those celebrating St. Patrick's Day this week, enjoy the weekend. And we'll see you soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com.